The hum of the central air conditioning was the only thing filling the silence of our four-bedroom suburban home in Oak Creek. It's that specific kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the house itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to shatter the peace. I was sitting at the kitchen island, staring at a glass of Chardonnay that I hadn't touched in 20 minutes. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip behind the manicured tree-line of the cul-de-sac, casting long amber shadows across the hardwood floors. It was a beautiful house, the kind of house you see in a real estate magazine and think people who live there must have it all figured out. But as I sat there, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I'm 34, and for the last 5 years, I've been Mrs. David Harrison. David is a good man, stable, clear as throat, successful, a partner at a mid-sized architectural firm in the city. He's the kind of guy who remembers to get the oil changed in my SUV before I even notice the light is on. He's kind, he's provider-oriented, and if I'm being brutally honest with myself, he's become more of a roommate than a lover. The passion didn't die with a bang. It just sort of eroded over time, replaced by discussions about property taxes, the guest list for the neighborhood barbecue, and whose turn it was to take the trash to the curb. Then there's Leo. Leo is David's son from his first marriage. He's 19 now, a sophomore at the state university, and he'd been back home for the summer for about 3 weeks. When I first married David, Leo was a lanky 14-year-old with braces and a shy disposition. I liked him instantly. We had this easy older sister, younger brother vibe. I was the cool stepmom who didn't nag him about his grades and would occasionally slip him $20 when David was being too strict. But somewhere in the last year or two, the boy I knew had vanished. The Leo who came home this summer was different. He had filled out. His shoulders were broad. His jawline had sharpened into something striking, and he carried himself with a sort of restless, brooding energy that made the air in the room feel charged whenever he walked in. He was quiet, but it wasn't the shy quiet of his early teens. It was a guarded, observant silence. He spent most of his time in his room upstairs or at the gym, and when we did interact, there was a new, uncomfortable tension that I couldn't quite put my finger on. David was away for the week on a business trip in Chicago. He'd left on Monday, and by Thursday, the isolation of the house was starting to get to me. I'd spent the day running errands and trying to ignore the gnawing sense of boredom that comes with a life that is too comfortable and too predictable. I had cooked a dinner that neither of us really ate together. Leo had taken a plate up to his room, citing a heavy study load for an online summer course, and I'd eaten mine while scrolling through social media, looking at lives that seemed much more vibrant than my own. Around 8:30 p.m., I decided I needed to get some laundry done. I gathered a basket of whites and headed upstairs. As I passed Leo's door, I noticed it was cracked open just an inch. Usually, it was shut tight. I keep out sign without the actual words. I paused for a second, intending to just pull it shut for him, but then I heard a sound. It was a low, rhythmic friction accompanied by a sharp, ragged intake of breath. My heart gave a sudden, violent thump against my ribs. I knew that sound. I should have walked away. I should have turned around, gone back downstairs, and poured myself another drink. That's what a good woman would do. That's what a loyal wife would do. But curiosity is a poisonous thing, especially when you've been feeling starved for any kind of intensity. I stayed. I stood perfectly still in the dim hallway, my hand hovering near the doorframe. Through the narrow gap, I could see a sliver of the room. Leo was sitting on the edge of his bed, his back partially turned toward the door. He was shirtless, his muscles tensed, his head tilted back. He was focused, completely lost in himself. I watched the way his arm moved, the way his breath hitched in the back of his throat. It was raw and intensely private, yet I couldn't look away. I felt a heat rise in my cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer humidity. It was a mix of voyeuristic guilt and a sudden sharp ache of desire that I hadn't felt in years. Seeing him like that, not as David's son, but as a man, shifted something in my brain that I couldn't shift back. I watched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute. My breathing had become shallow, mirroring his. Suddenly, he let out a long, shuddering exhale, his body slumping forward slightly as he finished. He stayed like that for a moment, his forehead resting in his hand, his chest heaving. I knew I had to move. If he looked up and saw me, it would be catastrophic. But as I went to step back, my foot caught the edge of the laundry basket I'd left on the floor. It made a dull plastic thud against the baseboard. Inside the room, I saw him freeze. He didn't turn around immediately, but I saw his shoulders lock. I panicked. Instead of running, which would have been the logical choice, I did something completely insane. I pushed the door open just a little further and spoke his name, my voice coming out breathier and less stable than I intended. "Leo," I said, trying to sound like I just happened to be passing by. "Are you okay?" I thought I heard something. It was a lie, and we both knew it. He turned slowly, his face flushed, his eyes wide and dark with a mixture of shock and something else, something that looked like defiance. He hadn't covered himself up yet. He just sat there, exposed and vulnerable, staring at me. The air in the room felt thick enough to choke on. I should have apologized and left. I should have made an excuse about the laundry, but I didn't move. I stayed in the doorway, my eyes locked onto his, and for the first time in my marriage, I felt truly dangerously alive. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of what I'd seen and what we were both thinking. Leo didn't look ashamed. Not really. He looked like he was waiting for me to make the next move. He looked like he'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. I looked at his messy hair, his flushed skin, and the way his gaze didn't waver from mine. He was a man, and he was looking at me not as his father's wife, but as a woman. "I saw you," I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might actually fail. "I saw what you were doing." Leo's expression shifted. A slow, knowing smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, though his eyes remained intense. He stood up slowly, not making any move to hide himself. He took a step toward me, and I felt the urge to run battle with the urge to step closer. The boundaries of our lives, the suburban house, the marriage certificate, the family dinners, all of it seemed to dissolve in the heat of that small, shadowed bedroom. He asked, his voice low and rasping, "Are you going to tell my dad, or are you going to help me?" The audacity of it took my breath away. It was a challenge, a line drawn in the sand. He was calling my bluff, sensing the same hunger in me that I'd been trying so hard to bury under a mountain of domestic normalcy. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized that I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to go back downstairs to my lukewarm wine and my empty bed. I wanted to burn it all down. I took a step into the room, the door clicking shut behind me as I pushed it with my heel. The sound was final, like a gavel coming down. There was no going back from this. I wasn't the cool stepmom anymore. I wasn't David's loyal wife. I was just a woman in a quiet house, standing in the dark with a man who wasn't hers, making a choice that would change everything. The click of the door latch felt like a gunshot in the stagnant air of the bedroom. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard, a definitive break from the world outside that hallway. Behind that door was the life I had spent 5 years building, the mahogany furniture, the framed wedding photos from our ceremony in Napa, and the reputation of a woman who had it all. But inside this room, under the dim glow of a single bedside lamp, none of that existed. There was only the heat radiating off Leo and the frantic, heavy thrum of my own pulse in my ears. Leo didn't move. He stood there, tall and lean, watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. He was waiting. He had thrown the gauntlet down with that question, and now he was watching to see if I'd run or if I'd cross the line. I could feel the sweat starting to bead at the nape of my neck. My mind was screaming at me to turn around, to laugh it off as a joke, to tell him he was being a typical troubled 19-year-old and go downstairs. But my body wouldn't obey. I was anchored to the floor by a magnetic pull I couldn't explain and didn't want to fight. "You shouldn't talk to me like that," I said. Though the words lacked any real bite, they sounded like a suggestion rather than a reprimand. "Why not?" Leo countered. He took another step closer, closing the distance until I could smell the scent of his soap, something woodsy and sharp mixed with the raw, salty musk of his exertion. "You're the one who was watching Claire. You've been watching me all summer. Don't act like this is just about tonight." His use of my first name was like a physical touch. To David, I was Honey, or Sweetheart. To the neighbors, I was Mrs. Harrison. But when Leo said Claire, it sounded like a secret. It stripped away the title of stepmother and left me exposed. He was right, and that was the most terrifying part. I had been watching. I had noticed the way his t-shirts clung to his back, the way he looked in his swim trunks by the pool, and the way he'd linger in the kitchen a little too long when I was wearing my silk robe in the mornings. I had told myself it was just curiosity, or maybe a subconscious maternal instinct. But the heat pooling in my stomach right now told a much different story. "I'm your father's wife, Leo," I whispered, the words feeling like a flimsy shield I was holding up against a tidal wave. "He's in Chicago," Leo said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a vibration that I felt in my chest. "He's in a hotel room, probably checking his emails or watching the news. He isn't here. I'm here and you're here." He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from my waist. He didn't touch me yet. He was giving me one last chance to bolt. I looked up at him, and for a split second, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who needed help with his homework or a ride to the mall. But then he moved his hand that final inch, resting it firmly on my hip, and that boy was gone forever. His palm was hot, even through the fabric of my sundress, and the contact sent a literal jolt through my nervous system. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, my eyes fluttering shut for a brief moment. Everything about this was wrong. It was a betrayal of the deepest kind. David was a good man. He provided for me. He loved me in his own predictable way, and he trusted me with his home and his son. But as Leo's thumb began to trace slow, deliberate circles against my hip bone, I realized that good wasn't enough anymore. I was starving for something visceral, something that didn't feel like a chore or a scheduled event. I wanted to feel wanted, not just appreciated. Leo leaned in, his face so close to mine that I could feel his breath on my lips. "You said you wanted to help," he murmured, throwing my own panicked words back at me. "So help me, Claire. Stop thinking about him and look at me." I finally looked. I saw the desperation in his eyes, a reflection of the same emptiness I'd been carrying. I reached up, my hands trembling as I placed them on his bare chest. His skin was smooth and firm, his heart beating a frantic rhythm beneath his ribs. The touch felt electric, like touching a live wire. I knew right then that I was crossing a point of no return. You don't come back from this. You don't go back to Sunday brunches and talking about the lawn once you've put your hands on your stepson in the dark. But the guilt was being drowned out by the sheer, overwhelming rush of the present. I felt a surge of power, too. 4 years, I had played the role of the supportive wife, the background character in David's successful life. But here with Leo, I was the center of the universe. I was the one in control, even as I felt myself losing it. I tilted my head back, and Leo didn't hesitate. He leaned down and pressed his lips to mine. It wasn't a soft, tentative kiss. It was hungry and demanding, a release of all the tension that had been building between us since he arrived home in May. It tasted like rebellion, and woods and the Chardonnay I'd been sipping downstairs. I should have pushed him away. I should have screamed. Instead, I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him closer, my fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck. The world outside, the cul-de-sac, the architectural firm, the suburban morality, ceased to exist. There was only the sound of our breathing and the friction of my dress against his skin. He backed me up against the door, his weight pressing me into the wood. The coldness of the door against my back contrasted with the heat of his body in a way that made me gasp into his mouth. "You have no idea," he muttered against my skin, his kisses moving down to my jawline and then my neck. "How long I've wanted to do this. Watching you and my dad, it was killing me." A cold shiver went through me at the mention of David, but it was quickly replaced by a dark, twisted thrill. He had been watching me, too. This wasn't just a moment of weakness on my part. It was a mutual obsession that had been simmering under the surface of our perfect family. It made the betrayal feel more inevitable, like a car crash we'd both been driving toward for months. He moved his hands down to the hem of my dress, his eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. I knew if I said stop right now, he would. He was 19, but he wasn't a monster. He was just as lost as I was, but I didn't say stop. I reached down and helped him, the fabric sliding up and over my head until it was just another heap on the floor next to his discarded shirt. The air from the AC hit my skin, making me shiver, but Leo was there to keep me warm. He lifted me up, and I wrapped my legs around his waist, the intimacy of the movement making my head spin. He carried me the few steps to the bed where David had sat just weeks ago, helping Leo pack for a weekend trip. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I pushed it down, burying it deep where I wouldn't have to look at it until the sun came up. As he laid me back against the pillows, the reality of what we were doing hit me with a fresh wave of adrenaline. This was it. This was the betrayal. This was the end of the life I knew and the beginning of something dark, messy, and undeniably addictive. I looked up at the ceiling, thinking for a split second about the fairy tale life I thought I wanted when I married David. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a tragedy in the making. And as Leo moved over me, his eyes dark with a promise of everything I'd been missing, I realized I was more than ready to play my part. The weight of the situation didn't truly settle in until the immediate, frantic rush of the encounter began to subside into a heavy, lingering haze. We lay there in the dark, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the slats of the wooden blinds, creating a striped pattern across the tangled sheets. The silence of the house had returned, but it wasn't the peaceful silence of an hour ago. It was a deafening, accusatory quiet. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a footstep, and every rustle of the trees outside sounded like a car pulling into the driveway. Leo was lying on his back, staring up at the ceiling fan as it whirred lazily overhead. His chest was still rising and falling with a heavy rhythm. I was curled on my side, my back to him, pulling the edge of the duvet up to my shoulders, as if it could protect me from the reality of what had just happened. My skin felt hypersensitive, every place where he had touched me still humming with a ghost of the electricity that had just bypassed every moral circuit in my brain. "You're thinking about him," Leo said. It wasn't a question. His voice was flat, stripped of the bravado he'd carried earlier. "How can I not be, Leo?" I whispered. My voice sounded thin and fragile, like glass about to crack. "He's your father. He's my husband. We're in his house. We're in your childhood bedroom. For God's sake." I heard him shift, the mattress groaning under his weight. "It hasn't been my childhood bedroom for a long time, Claire. And it hasn't been a real marriage for you either. Don't lie and say it has. I've seen the way you look at the clock when he comes home. I've seen the way you pull away when he tries to be affectionate in the kitchen." His words stung because they were true. David was a man of habit, and his affection had become a habit, too, something he checked off a list like a chore. But hearing it from Leo made it feel sordid. It made my dissatisfaction feel like a motive rather than a tragedy. I turned over to look at him. In the dim light, he looked older than 19, but there was still a shadow of that vulnerable boy in the set of his mouth. "That doesn't justify this," I said, gesturing to the space between us. "There is no world where this ends well. If he finds out, he loses everything. He loses his wife and his son in one day. Do you even care about that?" Leo finally looked at me, and the intensity in his gaze was chilling. "I care that for the first time in years, I don't feel like an outsider in my own life. When he married you, everything changed. He was so focused on being the perfect husband to a younger woman that he forgot how to be a father. You became the center of his world, and I became the ghost in the hallway. Tonight, I wasn't the ghost." The bitterness in his voice was a revelation. I had always thought of our relationship as easy and light, but beneath that cool stepmom exterior I'd cultivated, Leo had been harboring a deep-seated resentment, not just for his father, but for me. And yet, that resentment had twisted itself into a fixation. He didn't just want to be noticed. He wanted to take the one thing David valued most. A cold realization washed over me. This wasn't just about passion or summer boredom. There was a layer of revenge here that I had walked right into. "Is that all I am to you?" I asked, my heart sinking. "A way to get back at him?" Leo reached out, his fingers brushing a stray hair away from my forehead. His touch was gentler now, almost possessive. "No," he said softly. "It started like that, maybe a long time ago. But then I started watching you because I couldn't stop. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about how you look when you think no one is watching. How you seem so lonely in a room full of people. I don't want to hurt him, Claire. I just want what he has and doesn't appreciate. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream at him for being manipulative, for being a child playing with fire. But I couldn't, because I was the adult. I was the one who should have known better. I was the one who had opened the door. I looked at the clock on the nightstand, 11:42 p.m. David would be calling soon for his nightly check-in before he went to sleep in his hotel room. The thought made me feel physically ill. I sat up, clutching the sheet to my chest, and looked around for my dress. It was crumpled on the floor like a discarded skin. I have to go downstairs. I have to act like nothing happened. He's going to call. You can't act like nothing happened, Leo said, sitting up as well. He made no move to cover himself, his confidence returning as he saw me begin to crumble. You know it, and I know it. The air in this house is different now. We can never do this again, I said, my voice shaking as I stood up and reached for my clothes. This was a mistake, a massive, horrible lapse in judgment. Tomorrow, we'll go back to how things were. You'll go to the gym. I'll go to the grocery store. And we won't talk about this ever. Leo let out a short, dry laugh that lacked any humor. You really think you can just flip a switch? You think you can go back to being stepmom after tonight? Look at me, Claire. I didn't want to look at him. I wanted to vanish. I pulled the dress over my head, the fabric feeling rough and foreign against my skin. I felt like I was putting on a costume. I smoothed my hair with trembling fingers, trying to erase the evidence of his hands. My mind was already racing, constructing the lies I would tell David. I would say I was tired. I would say the connection was bad. I would tell him I loved him. The thought of saying those words felt like swallowing broken glass. I'm going downstairs, I repeated, my voice firmer now as the survival instinct kicked in. Stay in here. Don't come out until morning. I didn't wait for his answer. I grabbed the laundry basket, the same one that had started this whole nightmare, and stepped out into the hallway. The house was still dark, still quiet, but now it felt like a cage. Every shadow seemed to be watching me. I hurried down the stairs, my knees feeling weak, and made it to the kitchen just as my phone began to vibrate on the marble island. The caller ID flashed, David Mobile. I stared at it for 3 long vibrations. My reflection in the dark window above the sink looked like a stranger, pale, wide-eyed, and guilty. I took a deep breath, forced my features into a mask of normalcy I didn't feel, and swiped to answer. Hey, honey, I said, my voice remarkably steady. How was the meeting? Long. David's voice came through, sounding tired and warm, a stark contrast to the sharp, edgy tone of his son upstairs. But successful. I think we're going to land the account. I really wish you were here to celebrate with me. The hotel has this incredible rooftop bar. I wish I was there, too, I lied. The words felt heavy on my tongue. How's everything at home? He asked. Is Leo behaving himself? I know he can get a little moody when he's cooped up. I looked up at the ceiling, thinking of the man sitting on the bed directly above me. He's fine, David. Just quiet. He's been in his room all night studying. I think the summer course is really taking a lot out of him. Good, David said. I'm glad he's focused. I'll be home Saturday afternoon. Maybe we can all go out to that new steakhouse in the city. My treat. Sounds perfect, I whispered. I'll see you Saturday. We said our goodnights. And as soon as the line went dead, I dropped the phone like it was red hot. I sank onto one of the bar stools, burying my face in my hands. The betrayal wasn't just the act. It was the ease with which the lies had come. It was the realization that I was capable of living a double life. But as I sat there in the dark, I heard a faint sound from the top of the stairs. I looked up. Leo was standing on the landing, his silhouette framed by the light from his open door. He didn't say anything. He just watched me, a silent reminder that Saturday was a long way off and that the quiet summer was only just beginning. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological torture. The suburban domesticity that used to feel boring now felt like a minefield. Every time I heard Leo's bedroom door open upstairs, my heart would lurch into my throat. Every time we shared a space, the kitchen, the living room, even the backyard, the air felt like it was being sucked out of the room. He didn't hide it. That was the most terrifying part. While I was frantic, trying to scrub the invisible stain of guilt off every surface, Leo moved through the house with a new, predatory ease. He would catch my eye over the rim of a milk carton or brush past me in the pantry, his touch lingering just a second too long to be accidental. He was playing a game, and he knew I was too terrified of the consequences to forfeit. By Saturday morning, I was a wreck. I had barely slept, spending most of my time staring at the ceiling and listening for his footsteps. When David's text came through saying he was pulling into the driveway, I felt a wave of nausea, so strong I had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter. I checked my reflection in the microwave one last time. I looked older. There were dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could truly hide. I smoothed my sundress, the same one I'd worn Thursday night, a choice I immediately regretted but didn't have time to change, and walked to the front door. David looked exactly the same. He was wearing his charcoal travel suit, carrying his leather briefcase, his face lighting up with that familiar, steady smile the moment he saw me. He dropped his bags and pulled me into a hug. It was a husband's hug, warm, safe, and utterly oblivious. As he pressed his face into my hair, I felt like a fraud. I felt like the house was going to collapse around us because it couldn't support the weight of the lie I was carrying. God, it's good to be home, David sighed, pulling back to kiss my forehead. The city was a circus. I missed this. I missed you. I missed you too, I said, the words sounding hollow in my own ears. Hey, Dad. We both turned. Leo was standing at the bottom of the stairs. He looked perfectly normal, t-shirt, gym shorts, a slight smirk on his face. He looked like the picture-perfect son, welcoming his father home. He walked over and gave David a brief, one-armed hug. How was Chicago? Leo asked, his voice steady. Productive, son. Very productive, David said, clapping him on the shoulder. Your mom said you've been hitting the books hard. I'm proud of you, Leo. Keep that momentum up. The your mom hit me like a physical blow. David used it affectionately, but in this context, it felt like a sick joke. I looked at Leo, pleading with my eyes for him to stay quiet, to keep the mask on. Leo just looked at David, then shifted his gaze to me. The smirk deepened. Yeah, Leo said, his eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying boldness. I've learned a lot this week. Some things you just can't get from a textbook, you know. David laughed, completely missing the subtext. That's my boy. Real-world experience is everything. Dinner at the steakhouse was a slow-motion car crash. David spent the entire time talking about the new firm partners and the zoning laws for the new project downtown. He was happy, expansive, and totally disconnected from the tension vibrating across the white linen tablecloth. Leo sat directly across from me. Every time David looked down at his menu or waved over the sommelier, Leo would stretch his leg out under the table. His foot would find mine, pressing firmly against my ankle, a silent, rhythmic reminder of our secret. I sat there cutting my steak into tiny, systematic pieces I couldn't swallow, nodding and smiling like a programmed doll while my skin crawled. Is the steak okay, Claire? David asked, noticing my untouched plate. You've barely eaten. Just a little headache. I lied, forced to look up. The heat today was a lot. You should get some rest tonight, David said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I was hoping we could have a little less time since I've been gone, but your health comes first. I felt Leo's foot press harder against mine. I felt sick. I'll be okay, I whispered. Just need some water. When we got home, the house felt even smaller. David went into the office to check a few last-minute emails, leaving me and Leo in the kitchen. I began loading the dishwasher with frantic, jerky movements, needing to do something with my hands. Leo leaned against the island, watching me. Stop it, I hissed, not looking at him. Stop the games, Leo. He's home. It's over. It's not over, Claire, he said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. You think you can just go back to that? Look at him. He doesn't even see you. He sees a trophy. He sees a wife. He doesn't see you. He loves me. I snapped, finally looking at him. My eyes were stinging with tears of pure frustration. He loves the idea of you, Leo countered, stepping closer. If he loved you, you wouldn't have let me into that room. If he loved you, you wouldn't be standing here shaking because you're terrified of how much you liked it. Get out, I whispered. Go to your room. Leo leaned in, his face inches from mine. I'm going. But remember, Claire, he's sleeping in your bed tonight, but you'll be thinking about mine. He turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. I stood there for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant clicking of David's keyboard from the office. I felt like I was splitting in two. One half of me wanted to run into the office, fall at David's feet, and confess everything, to beg for a forgiveness I knew I didn't deserve. The other half, the darker, hungrier half that had been awakened on Thursday night, was already wondering when David would have to go on his next business trip. An hour later, I was in our master suite. The room was beautiful, lavender-scented candles, high thread count sheets, a view of the moonlit garden. David was already in bed, propped up on his pillows, reading a trade journal. He looked so peaceful, so settled. I climbed in beside him, my body stiff and cold. "You okay, honey?" he asked, putting the journal down and reaching over to turn off the lamp. "Fine," I said, my voice a ghost. He pulled me toward him, his arm draping over my waist. It was the familiar, comfortable weight of 5 years of marriage. He kissed the back of my neck and settled into his pillow, his breathing soon evening out into the rhythmic cadence of sleep. I lay there in the dark, staring at the shadows of the tree branches dancing on the wall. Every sound in the house was amplified. I heard a floorboard creak in the hallway. I heard the faint sound of a door closing upstairs. My mind was a whirlwind of images. The look in Leo's eyes, the heat of his skin, the cold, clinical reality of the life I was now faking. I realized then that the betrayal wasn't a one-time event. It was a poison that had entered the bloodstream of our home. It was in the walls, in the carpet, in the very air we breathed. I thought about the 3-zone strategy I'd heard about for viral content. How you need a hook, a build-up, and a payoff. My life had become that content. I was the hook, Leo was the build-up, and the payoff was a slow, agonizing destruction of everything David Harrison believed his life to be. As I lay there, trapped between the man I had promised to love and the boy who had unraveled that promise in a single night, I felt a tear finally slip down my temple and disappear into the expensive pillowcase. I wasn't just a wife anymore. I wasn't just a stepmother. I was a liar, a traitor, and a woman who had realized too late that the most dangerous thing in the world isn't hate. It's the kind of boredom that makes you willing to set your own house on fire just to see the flames. The house was quiet again, but for the first time in 5 years, the quiet didn't feel safe. It felt like a countdown, and I knew with a sinking, terrifying certainty that this was only the beginning.